Thanks for joining me, everyone. For those who don't know me yet, I am Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 24 years. I got started during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and panic disorder, and it had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house, I was on disability, and was fortunate enough to be paired up with a psychologist back then who was already several decades deep into teaching and practicing mindfulness and insight meditation. And that's where my practice began. And it sparked a lifelong recovery to the point where after, a couple of years of practice, my own life became a far more pleasant place to be than it had been even before all of my anxiety and depression issues and panic began. And so now I offer the tools and techniques that I've been taught, that I've found for myself, so that I can help others the way that so many have helped me and continue to help me. All right? It's a lifelong practice. It's a living practice. So this morning, I'd like to offer mental floss, an opportunity to maybe clean things out a little bit. So let's jump in, okay? I always like to begin by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head, as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. If we are feeling some tension right now, mentally, physically, emotionally, that's completely fine. There's no need to fight our tension, which just adds tension to tension. I also like to notice what is in contact with the chair, the floor, cushion. So there's a sense of grounding. Even if I don't feel particularly grounded at the moment, there is something beneath me that is supporting me, and I can allow it to do so. Let's take a moment to notice this sense of support beneath us, and this gentle lift at the top, and whatever else happens to be here for us in between the two, right now, however it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And you may notice, as soon as we bring our attention to our breathing, we begin to shape or control the breathing in a certain way. Maybe in a way that we think we're supposed to for a meditation practice. Something deep, something long, something contemplative, right? And that brings me to the first point I'd like to make for today's sitting, which is we are not passive recipients of our experience. Our reactions, our responses shape our experience. So when we come to the experience of the breathing as it is, we very often, consciously or otherwise, not only perceive that breathing, but make a decision about how it's supposed to be. And then begin to try to make it that way. And then, of course, based on trying to shape that experience of the breathing, we set the causes and conditions for what might come up next. Well, now we might decide, well, we're not shaping or controlling it in the right way, or we're not doing it well enough. And then we have a reaction or a response to that line of thinking, which creates our next experience. So our experiences aren't things that are just happening to us. We have a certain experience in the form of a thought or a feeling or a sensation. And we do something with it. Again, consciously or otherwise. And based on what we do with it, that affects what our next experience is. And the cycle continues. So we are not passive recipients of our experience. We are involved. So very often the first step in clear seeing, the kind of clear seeing we develop in this practice, the kind of clear seeing we need so that we can stop getting in our own way, is to see how we're getting in our own way, see what we're doing with what's coming up, how we are shaping our experience, what our role is. And one of the most powerful and basic ways that I have found to do that is to simply observe the breathing without trying to shape or control it. It's very simple, but not easy. Let's take a couple of minutes with that. And see if you can notice what comes up in the course of practicing this. one of the challenges, of course, of engaging in a practice like this is we're making space for things to come up, and, well, they're coming up. Very often what comes up is thoughts, narratives, storylines, daydreams. But even here, we're still not a passive recipient of our experience. Because what does the mind do? Well, the mind thinks a lot. And it throws out all kinds of thoughts and storylines. Far more than we could reasonably entertain at any one time. It's giving us lots of options. Which means, at some level, we're choosing which ones to pick up. Which ones to follow. Which ones to ride away on. And then that ends up shaping our experience for the next, minute? 5 minutes? An hour? Rest of the day? Maybe the better part of our lives. So there's a real opportunity for clear seeing here, isn't there? Of, well, wait a minute. Which thoughts do I keep picking up? And why? And how's that working out for me? Again, we are deeply involved in creating our own experience. Even if it doesn't feel like it, because we've built up these habits that are so ingrained that we're on autopilot. It just seems to happen by itself. That's why these things feel like they're happening to us. We no longer see our role, what we are doing. Thinking, narrating, storyline writing, these aren't things, these are processes. So somebody must be perpetuating these processes. And whoever's perpetuating them can make changes to them. And see what kind of effects arise as a result of those changes. Every thought we have is affected by the thought that came before it, and affects the thought that comes after it. Again, it's a process. But it's a process we are involved in. We don't choose what comes up in the mind. We don't necessarily choose what the mind presents to us. But we can make decisions about what we do with what is presented to us. We can choose to anchor on the breathing and simply notice what is being presented. Without latching on to anything. Is this easy? Absolutely not. That's why we practice. Because it is worth it. It is well worth it, in my experience. We may experience painful thoughts, uncomfortable feelings. How we handle those thoughts, how we handle those feelings, what we do with them. That determines whether we're going to experience suffering on top of our pain and our discomfort. Pain and discomfort, they're going to happen. We can't have comfort without discomfort. That's part of being here. That's part of life. Suffering? Well, that's up to us. We can experience tremendous pain without causing ourselves additional suffering. Again, is it easy? Absolutely not. This is why we practice. And practice making space, seeing what comes up in that space, seeing what we're doing with what's coming up, how it's working out for us. And based on that seeing, we figure out what to try next that might give us some better effects. And we see how that works out. And we repeat the process. With patience, with compassion, with the understanding that this is often a 3 steps forward, 2 steps back affair. It's the nature of the path. It's not something getting in the way of our practice. It is our practice. And when we have reactions to that practice, well, guess what? Clear seeing of those reactions is also part of the practice. In this way, the practice builds upon itself. It's sustainable. It's a sustainable practice. And little by little, we begin to clear things out. Make a little more space. Perhaps with a little less reaction. This is how we open to the experience of life. Including its pain, including its discomfort. Without adding suffering on top. Without getting in our own way. Thank you, everyone. I'll hang on for a couple of minutes if anyone would like to share anything in the chat. Yeah, Farnaz, buildup of little incidents going unnoticed or ignored. In my case, they were very noticed and very ignored. Yeah, denial and distraction were my ways of dealing with my depression and anxiety. And as I often like to say, they're great strategies until they're not. They're not sustainable. I mean, I kept them going for almost 10 years, but completely wore myself out in the process. So by the time things finally caught up with me, yeah, I was, well, like I said, I was housebound, on disability. And that wasn't because I just woke up one morning and everything had just, I mean, it built up. Like I say, this all comes from Theravada Buddhism, the study of the historical Buddha as best we know them. What did the Buddha teach? How to alleviate our suffering. And how do we go about that? Seeing what the causes and conditions are that are leading to the effects. The effect being the suffering. And causes and conditions are interrelated and happening over time and space, all playing off of each other in various ways. And some of them are things beyond our control. But how we deal with them is something we can control, something we can practice, something we can learn from, something we can improve upon. And what is that process? What is that practice? But just another form of changing causes and conditions in the interest of having better effects. In this case, the effect of not suffering. not suffering. So there can be a cause and condition that is beyond our control, that is painful or uncomfortable. But then there's also how we are handling what is painful and uncomfortable. Those are both going to affect whether or not we suffer, right? Primarily the how we're handling it part. So we really need this clear seeing to be able to discern all these causes and conditions, because there's not just one or two of them a lot of the time, right? They're all happening internally, externally, so many of them at once. We can't even comprehend them all. Like I said during the sitting, our mind is showing us a subset of thoughts that are available to us, and we're choosing which ones to go with. But there's so many more we're not even aware of. We can't possibly see it all. So we need to really hone our seeing, our clear seeing, so that we can get the best, most accurate possible picture of what's going on. Because otherwise, how are we going to know what's a skillful action? What the best thing to try is? We're scientists. We're seeing what we've got here, and based upon it, figuring out what we should do so that we're not causing our suffering. Let's see what Karen had. What you said today is relevant to what I've been experiencing, way too much negative anxiety-ridden thoughts that Cheers, Karen. Yeah, that's just it. It's not like I don't have negative thoughts. Of course I do, right? This practice doesn't mean we're never going to have a negative thought again, a negative feeling again. We're never going to experience discomfort again. And sometimes we think that, we might wish that, right? It's not how it works. We're still human. We're still people. Still in this world. It's about making it so that we are not adding suffering on top of the pain and discomfort that is going to be here sometimes. And is allowed to be here sometimes. I mean, we couldn't survive without pain. How do we know to step away from something dangerous without pain? Where we run into trouble is we tend to then associate pain with danger all the time. We tend to equate pain with danger, even though there are some things that may be painful that aren't actually dangerous. That's where we run into trouble. That's not clear seeing, right? That's literally an error that we're making in how we are perceiving something. So that's the kind of thing that we want to be able to see clearly and discern. Oh, okay, this may be uncomfortable. This may even be painful. Is it unsafe? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Our lizard brain that thinks we're still out on the African savannah 50,000 years ago with a saber-toothed tiger around the corner. Yeah, that's going to say, okay, anytime you feel pain, that's danger. Because back then, yeah, it could have been. It could have been mortal danger. So it made sense to be extra cautious, to try to keep us extra safe. Because at any given moment, if we didn't do that, we might be gone. Is that the world we have here today? Not for most of us. But are our systems, our subconscious systems, our nervous systems, they still wired to react that same way? Yeah, they are. And that's where we get into trouble. So we want to be able to see that, so that we can negotiate our reactions and responses in a way that is commensurate with the world that we are actually living in, rather than reacting and responding as if we were still out on the African savannah. Because how's that working out for us? Yeah. Ren, it's a process with baby steps. Ain't that the truth? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Like I say, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's not a straight line. Some days are better than others. It's the nature of the beast. How we handle the fact that some days are better than others makes a big difference. It makes a big difference. From Uli, yeah, a good reminder that we are in control of our thoughts and that we are not our thoughts. Separation is key. I always hesitate to say in control of our thoughts. It depends how we mean. Like I say, we don't get to choose what comes up necessarily, but we do get to choose what we do with it. So to that extent, yes, we can certainly shape our thinking. And because of neuroplasticity, the way that our brain literally at a physical level will rewire itself based on our thought processes, we do then actually have some indirect influence on what starts to come up. Because what we think about more comes up more. If we start to change which thoughts, which processes we attend to, we pay attention to, right? It's always interesting. We pay attention. We have a limited amount of attention, like money, right? So just like paying money for something, we are paying attention to something. Is it worth it? Are we paying attention to something that is worth what we are paying? Or are we paying for something that's just causing us suffering? So when we pay attention to the right things, the right ways, those things will begin to arise more often. And in that way, we do have some control even over the things that we cannot directly control. But yes, it is key to recognize that we are not our thoughts. Thoughts arise. Thoughts pass. What happens with those thoughts? Yeah, we have some control over that. But remember, if we're our thoughts, who's listening to them? Right? From Ren, what practice would you recommend to precede old painful emotions? Should we just try to let them go or work with them some way? I'm always hesitant with saying just let them go, because even saying just let them go, in the attempt to let them go, there's a clinging there. Letting go isn't something that we try to do. Letting go is something that, in my experience, happens. So, I have a session out here on Insight Timer called Unlocking Acceptance. You might want to check that out. The upshot of that session is that we do not accept things by trying to accept them. We don't let things go by trying to let them go. That's a form of resistance in itself. We're trying to get rid of something. Okay, I'm going to accept this thing so it'll go away. I'm going to accept this thing so it doesn't hurt anymore. It's a form of resistance. What I have found is when something is coming up that is uncomfortable, and we feel this resistance arise to it, pay attention to the resistance itself. When something comes up, oh, I don't want this here. Whether we are actually thinking, okay, well, I need to get this out of here, or we take the flip side of it and say, okay, I'm going to accept this so it leaves. Which both really the same thing. Make space for the resistance itself. Resistance, like all of these other things, it's a process. It's an experience. And we are not passive recipients of our experience. We are not a passive recipient of our resistance. I have found that when something uncomfortable comes up that I want to get rid of, usually the most powerful thing is to be with that wanting to get rid of in itself. What's going on inside there? What is the resistance process all about? And again, not saying, okay, I'm going to open up to the resistance process so it goes away, because that won't work. There's an agenda there. There's an angle there. Again, it's not easy. It takes practice to genuinely open to something that is unpleasant. But that's how we gain this clear seeing. Because if we're not going to open to it, if we're not going to look at it, if we're not going to inquire about it, how are we going to learn? How are we going to see clearly? I'm not talking about big trauma, just regrets and mistakes. Same thing. In fact, that's probably a better place to start, because I don't know that I would necessarily recommend starting with a big trauma. Start with the small things. Pick a small thing. Feel the resistance. Let resistance be resistance. What does it want? Why is it here? What is its message? Give it the floor for a few minutes. Let it say its piece. Uninterrupted. See what you find. I'll close with this. You read once, the only way out is through. This came up in a session I was doing, I think this past weekend. I do some sessions on Meetup, the Boston Mindfulness and Insight Meditation Meetup. One of the things that came up in the discussion on there was this saying that we hear in spiritual circles a lot of, the only way out is through. And I found that 99% of the time that's true, but I always like to make an addendum to that. Usually the only way out is through, but you don't have to do it all at once. Okay, those baby steps again. Trying to do too much, too fast, also isn't helpful. That's one of the traps we run into as people, as humans, right? So we start to develop some clear seeing in this practice. We finally start to really see what the problem is, and then what do we want to do? Well, we want to fix it as fast as possible. Okay, I found the problem. Let's get this thing solved, right? Well, as we were saying a few minutes ago, this doesn't happen overnight. These things build up over time from all sorts of causes and conditions. And we're going to have to deconstruct them over time with more skillful causes and conditions. And we want to do that in a way that is sustainable, right? We don't want to make ourselves sick getting healthy. That's part of the clear seeing of the practice folding back in upon itself. We don't just get better at these things that we're trying to solve. We get better at the practice of solving them itself. One of the skills that we are honing in our practice is the skills of the practice itself. Again, it all folds back in on itself. And in fact, according to the Buddha, this practice is in the service of alleviating our suffering. We are releasing our attachment to the craving that is causing our suffering. And those cravings, those clingings, are to all kinds of things, internal and external. But the very last one that we relinquish is the clinging to this practice itself. So it all folds in on itself. Sometimes it can make it a little tricky to get started. Like, how does all this work? This is all very confusing. It's all circular. It's like, we find our way. And then when we find our way, its own momentum carries it. Once we begin to sort it out, oh, okay. It just has a way of unfolding naturally. It's been my experience. I'll let it go there. Okay? Cheers, everybody. Thanks so much. Take care.